Thanks a lot, John. Okay, we have to be efficient in this panel because there are 5 panels today. So we should not even go even beyond 5 minutes, and we are already 5 minutes late. There are 5 distinguished panelists whom you want to hear from, of course, and therefore I won't issue a summary of what they're going to talk about. And then the ambassadors panel will follow after this panel. Therefore, as I said, I won't summarize the salient points. I won't even introduce the panelists anymore because I know you know all of them. And I'll go directly to the Q&A. So to start the discussion is Professor Hubo, who is here in person. So, Professor.
Thank you, Madam, and thank you for the invitation with the organizers. This panel is very tough. Actually, in the last 2 years, a lot of things has happened. I think as for think tanks, tankers and scholars, we all want to know what happened. Firstly, I would like to share my understanding on China's policy and intentions in recent 2 years and even much longer time. In this dialogue, many guys are talking about China, on China's ambitions and China's coercion and China's bullying. However, I think I'm a little confident that I have a much better position to understand Beijing's maritime intentions and policy than most of you. China's sovereignty and maritime claims on the South China Sea have been consistent and continuous at least ever since 1947. Besides, since the late 1990s, China's approach and policy towards handling South China Sea disputes has not been changed, which is to share disputes and maintaining the status quo based on Deng Xiaoping's principle. If there is any change, it is that China's capabilities and determination to safeguard its maritime rights have significantly been strengthened, making its responses to external provocations much stronger and forceful. To be clear, in my judgment, Beijing has no plans to occupy St. Thomas Shore, Sabina Shore, and Sandy Cay now and in the foreseeable future. The reason why China has deployed so much force in recent 2 years at the above features is that it is worried that the Philippines would occupy them. China is a large and complex country, and Beijing has a lot of important agendas to deal with. You may not believe it, but the South China Sea is not even a hot topic in Beijing, which is very, very different from the atmosphere in Manila. In this round of friction between China and the Philippines at the beginning of 2023, Beijing paid little attention on the South China Sea issue. It is the Philippines' provocative actions and irritating statements on the South China Sea constantly reminding Beijing that its sovereignty and maritime rights in the South China Sea are being threatened and challenged, which pushes Beijing's response more and more tough and serious after August of 2023. We need to know that from 1999 to 2022, even in Aquilo third generation administration, there had always been a gentleman's agreement. You may whatever called it, but there did exist an agreement between China and the Philippines on the St. Thomas Shore. This is that Philippines promised not to transport construction materials or reinforce grounded warship. However, the Marcos administration denied it, and President Marcos himself claimed like that there had never been such agreement, and even there had been, he could tear it into pieces. Thus, in the perspective of Beijing, one significant unstable factor in the South China Sea is that some claimants are attempting to change the status quo and even violate the commitment of reform action of inhabiting on the presently uninhabited features in DOC. Although relevant parties had always different understandings of status quo, but everyone agrees that occupied actions should be frozen in separate islands. However, now it seems that some claims show the intention to break it. For instance, the Philippines claimed last year, like that, to develop Second Thomas Shoal into permanent military outpost and drive China out of the entire West Philippine Sea. Other claimants active in the oil and gas development also sometimes disregard the existing disputes with China over maritime delimitation. Without sharing these disputes, especially fishery dispute, the South China Sea will forever struggle for peace. Good news is that the situation at the Second Thomas Shoal has returned to normal, and the situation on the Sabina Shoal has also cooled down. The second uncertainty from China's perspective is that the interference of the U.S. in the South China Sea disputes and the U.S. Air Force to strengthen military deterrence. Since 2009, the U.S. has increasingly focused on South China Sea policy on China, shifting from relative neutrality on the dispute to taking sides and even direct intervention. Frankly speaking, every South China Sea claim has reasons for being criticized. But the United States has completely ignored the negative behaviors of other claimants and only targeted China, which is obviously not a rule-based of international order, but just great power competition game. Under the framework of pivot to Asia, Asia-Pacific rebalance and the Indo-Pacific strategy, emphasizing countering China, the U.S. has significantly bolstered its military presence and activity in the South China Sea and around. Generally, China doesn't object to U.S. military activity in the South China Sea as long as they don't directly endanger China's sovereignty, security, and operational safety. However, every year, thousands of sorties of military aircraft and hundreds of warships deployed to the coast waters of other coast states are definitely not a peaceful and friendly action as stimulated even in UN Charter and other international law. If the United States has reason to increase its military presence in the South China Sea, China has more reasons and has more resources to do that. Excessive military deterrence will be backfire and counterproductive. I have no interest to making value and stance judgments, but the truth is, from the end of the Cold War to 2009, when the U.S. paid less attention to the South China Sea and Southeast Asia, the situation in the region was generally more stable than it currently is. Finally, one suggestion for external countries and powers. External countries, including the U.S., should trust the wisdom of other member states and China, and should be confident that the South China Sea is the most openest sea in the world. External, is not a good term, but external is mainly a geographic concept, and don't think too much on that, and don't be over anxiety to the situation of the South China Sea. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor J. Batongbao.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, for this opportunity to speak on this matter. I'll try to zero in on probably just one or 2 points, and this is based on my experience for over 25 years now on this issue. My first engagement with Philippine-China issues started way back in 1999, the second negotiation over Mischief Reef. So over that period, I have been able to, shall we say, gain a kind of long-term memory about all these events. And rather than go into the minutiae, let's just probably focus on something more basic. No? I think that the panel is supposed to discuss the sources of threats to stability in the South China Sea. And I think, as also reflected in the remarks of my colleague here, the fundamental source of insecurity really is that China's interests in the South China Sea have always been defined and driven by its military and strategic objectives of establishing and gaining dominance and control in the first and second island chains. This is driven by a historical and overriding fear of the West and the US, the potential for interference as they see it. And basically what is happening is that everything is being seen through the lens of China-US competition. The Chinese dream, in a way, is symptomatic of this kind of state-sponsored xenophobia, shall we say, a fear of foreign interference and influence. Some scholars have pointed to China merely establishing its own version, no, of the Monroe Doctrine, a Monroe Doctrine with Chinese characteristics. However, this appears to be an ahistorical and decontextualized misinterpretation of past events and misplaced geographies. And what is happening is that China is repeating instead of learning from history. This is a product of the need of the Communist Party to extend its control over the hearts and minds of external peoples, non-Chinese peoples basically. And this results in its denial of the smaller states' independent interests and sovereignty within the South China Sea. The Philippines has been constantly and repeatedly accused of being a mere pawn or puppet of the United States, for example, as if we are merely actors or acting upon the orders of the US and pursuing US interests. China's inability to accept the agency and autonomy of smaller states is a reflection of the Communist Party's inherent and structural understanding of the nature of society, where resistance has to be suppressed and the power of the party must always reign supreme. There is an utter disregard for the reality and legitimacy of Philippines' specific interests, for example, in food security and energy security. Its efforts of engaging in resource extraction in the South China Sea is costing the Philippines its food security. Its utter disregard, for example, for the nature and benefits of coral reef ecosystems and how they support the rich fisheries in the South China Sea is emblematic of this disregard for the interests of other states. When it comes to energy security, its interference with the energy exploration efforts of the Philippines, no? At the cost of the Philippines' own economic growth and energy security is another example of this utter disregard. This is, in a way, a manifestation of the othering or the cultural disdain for non-Chinese nations. And we've seen this historically, starting from the time of the Middle Kingdom when they regarded everyone outside of China as barbarians. And now, currently seen, these are now cast as merely small countries in the backyard of big countries like China, who must necessarily accept China's quote-unquote correct view of justice and interest. This kind of imposed view, no, is, for me, the ultimate source of the insecurity and the threats to security and stability in the South China Sea. China gives primacy to power over self-restraint and convenience over contract. The nature of international law and international community building, after all, is based on the agreement on shared and common interests. Okay? And that means that even in case parties may have disparities in power, there would be an expectation of self-restraint in order to ensure that the community interest is the one which prevails, rather than preemptive and prioritized and selective allocation in favor of the more powerful, the bigger countries, the more needy countries. So the sensitivity, this I think manifests in China's sensitivity to smaller nations' attempts to increase their security, such as through the modernization of armed forces and engagement in alliances, which is their only option in light of the fact that as smaller, less powerful countries, they need to be able to match somehow. No? So I think that these are the most basic sources really of insecurity in this region, and all these events are manifestations of these particular specific sources. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks a lot, Professor Batungbakan. Okay, Ray Powell.
Morning. Good morning. I find myself this morning surrounded by my betters. I'm neither a doctor nor a professor. I am rather a simple retired military officer, and I make simple observations, I think. And one of the observations that I have is that the reason that we have to have a Manila dialogue on the South China Sea is because there is in many ways, the countries around the South China Sea, of course, are talking past one another because they perhaps don't recognize how very different the Philippines' security situation is from their own. And I'm not trying to downplay the security situation in Indonesia or Vietnam or Malaysia. What I'm saying is that the Philippines' situation is of another order. And so the discussions about UNCLOS and international law, while extremely important, in many ways are almost passé from the Philippines' perspective because of the nature of its security problem. And so if you are from another country and you're tempted to lecture the Philippines about provoking China or hyping the situation, I urge you to take a moment and think about what you're saying to someone whose shoes you are not in. And let me tell you what I mean. The situation in the West Philippine Sea has been deteriorating badly for the last quarter century. And it is no longer sufficient to simply characterize China's malicious activity in the West Philippine Sea as mere violations or incidents or even incursions, because we're well beyond that. We are far beyond that. Think about this. The Philippines is the only country that has a major Chinese military base in its exclusive economic zone. I'm talking about Mischief Reef, of course, from which China projects power deep within its waters. It is the only country that has had its access to major features within its exclusive economic zone controlled and restricted by a hostile foreign power. Scarborough Shoal, Second Thomas Shoal, Sabina Shoal, all of these now are, the access to all of these places is now controlled by China. And they are not above using aggressive tactics that we've all seen: blocking, swarming, bow crossing, ramming, water cannons, long-range acoustic devices, lasers, other dangerous aerial and maritime maneuvers to control access to features within the Philippines' exclusive economic zone, including features that can contain a military outpost that has been there for 25 years, since before the 2002 Declaration of Conduct in Parties of the South China Sea, and a major Philippine fishing ground at Scarborough Shoal. The Philippines faces a daily swarming and clustering of Chinese Coast Guard and maritime militia ships within the earned territorial sea of its outpost at T2 Island, which is not in the Philippines' exclusive economic zone, but it does earn a territorial sea, and Chinese ships are routinely within about 3 to 4 nautical miles of T2 Island, intimidating its civilian population and restricting its fishing activity. And of course, at places in the Philippines' exclusive economic zone, like Whitsun and Iroquois Reefs, there is a regular presence of China's Spratly backbone fishing vessels, part of its maritime militia. In fact, at Iroquois Reef, at my last check, there were dozens of these vessels. So the scope and scale of aggression is far above that faced by its neighbors. It demands a different paradigm for understanding the extent of PRC mendacity and the scope of the challenge faced by the Philippine government. And I'm going to say this very carefully. This is essentially a maritime occupation of a country's lawful exclusive economic zone by a hostile, even imperialist foreign power. So if we understand this problem as one of a foreign occupation, now we understand what the Philippines is looking at. It's not merely a matter of monitoring China's activity or challenging its approaches, but it's really one of long-term resistance, because that's what you do when you have your territory occupied by a foreign power, and in this case we're talking about maritime zones occupied by a foreign power. So that's what the Philippines is up against, and it's been using peaceful means to do so. You know, the model here is not an armed insurgency, but rather nonviolent direct action in the mode of, say, Mahatma Gandhi in India, which also faced a long-term occupation by a hostile foreign power. And eventually, as we know, Mr. Gandhi and the Indian people prevailed. But it took a long time of imposing costs upon the imperial occupying force to convince them that it was not in their national interest to remain. So China is attempting to control a vast maritime space by military and paramilitary force. And this, of course, creates vulnerabilities that occupying forces have. And I understand that this idea of an occupation, a maritime occupation, is a novel one and may be hard to get your mind around. But this is really the situation the Philippines faces. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ray. Okay, Dr. Haido.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to this important forum. And the following presentation is my own view, which do not necessarily reflect those of my Vietnamese government, my institution, the Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam. So I don't have 25 years of experience as Professor J. Patong Bakan, and I may not understand the Chinese foreign policy as Professor Huibo, but also I present my modest observation on what happened. So I'm also aware of Professor Jeff O'Dani said that we don't talk about academic jargon, but I really need to set up the framework for my subsequent analysis. So for me, the topic here about the rule of law and the threat to the rule of law. And of course, the rule of law refers to the application of agreed upon legal principles, norms, and framework to govern interactions between states and ensure the predictable, fair, and just outcome in global affairs. So it composed of 6 components. I'm very quick. The first one is respect for international agreement. Second, sovereign equality and non-interference. Third, peaceful dispute settlement. Fourth, prohibition of use and threat use of force. Accountability, and last but not least, the support for justice, development, and good governance. So from that framework, what I observed that there are 6 threats to the rule of law in the South China Sea. Of course, it's not only about the period 2023 or 24. What I do believe that the threat to the rules of law in the South China Sea has a long history, and I just have a brief summary here. So the first source of threat is non-compliance with UNCLOS. So we see in the South Chinese there exists a claims contravene international agreement, especially UNCLOS in 1982. Most notably, not limited to, the China dash line, the Strait Bay lines in the Paracels, the Strait Bay lines in the Gulf of Tonkin, the claims to historical rights, and of course, last but not least, the force share claims. So ambiguity also a problem. No concrete effort have been witnessed on the part of China to clarify the claims under the framework of international law, particularly UNCLOS. Those the second sort of threat to the rule-based order is interference with other countries' legitimate resource exploration and exploitation activities. And we see that number of examples here. The first is the imposed indoor fishing ban in the EEZs of other countries. The second, we see also that the Chinese vessel disrupted and harassed the oil and gas operation in the legitimate continental shelf of other countries, including Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines. Of course, what happened the more recently with the operations in the continental shelf of Malaysia and Indonesia. The challenge arises granted under UNCLOS. And we also the use of violence against and also unlawful arrest of Vietnamese fishermen fishing in the paracel waters. China used force to seize paracel from Vietnam in 1974. So the third source of threat is the aggressive maritime activities. China Coast Guard and maritime militia have engaged in confrontation actions as ramming, harassing vessels from other claimants, as Powell already mentioned, including Philippines, Vietnam, and other countries, violating correct and other international legal instruments, raising tensions and sidestepping lawful means of dispute settlement. There's no clear intent on settling the dispute peacefully. Gray zone operations imply coercive intents and undermine trust among the nations. On the contrary, adopting domestic legislation such as the Coast Guard law and regulation to implement that law also aside that to contravene the international law. The fourth source of threat is the rejections of international legal ruling, despite to ruling that invalidated China's expansive maritime claims. There's also effort to continue to assert the sovereignty over the vast areas of South China Sea, undermining the authority of national legal mechanism and the rule of law in upholding fair outcome of dispute states. The fifth source of threat is the encroachment on the sovereign equality. So the proposal for the joint exploitation of resources in the legitimate EEZ and continental shelf of other states. There's also the effort to refuse to recognize the rights of other smaller states in defending its rights, blaming it for the geopolitics and great power competition. And the sixth, we're also very concerned about the militarizations of disputed territories, the construction of military facilities on artificial islands in disputed areas onto the statewide coast, violates the intent of international law to maintain this region as peaceful, non-militarized zone until the dispute are resolved. So militarization not only exacerbates tensions, but also threatens the freedom of navigation and overfly, preserved under UNCLOS and prompting appropriate responses. So of course I will briefly just mention that the rules of law international relations have created the predictable, stable, and fair global order where state, organizations, and individuals understand by established norm, and that is very important to maintenance of peace and stability. So it also requested to come up with actionable measures. So I come up with the four, and I mentioned very quickly. The first, the need to build up capability of regional countries to resist coercive measures and military intimidation. The second is improving economic and political resilience of the country so that they can cope with that, to reduce the vulnerabilities to other type of coercion. The third is a constructive engagement with China and encourage China lead by example. For example, they did a very successful the delimitation in Gap of Tonkin on the basis of UNCLOS. The fourth, we need to stand the ground against any kind of coercive measure. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, everyone. To begin with, I would like to express my sincere gratitude for being invited here. Before I deliver my remarks, I would like to underline that these are my solely personal views and do not represent the views of the Republic of Indonesia, Defense University, or the government of Indonesia. We all know that South China Sea represents a region characterized by contentious territorial claims involving several nations, including China, Philippines, Vietnam, and some others. And there are disagreements over fishing rights and natural resources have intensified tensions and underscored the area's economic importance. Given its plentiful fisheries, oil reserve, and natural gas, the resources within this region foster competing claims that exacerbate regional discord. Even countries not involved in its claims, such as Indonesia, have also experienced adverse effects as exhibited in several tensions with the Chinese Coast Guard over the North Natuna Sea. However, at the center of the existing tension also lies the rivalry between the major powers manifested through their conflicting interests in sovereignty, trade routes, and regional supremacy. China's 9-dash line claims directly oppose the FONOPs proposed by the US, has brought ongoing competition and significantly complicates regional security dynamics as both nations strive for dominance and influence. China has in fact advanced its blue water navy strategy, which reflects its ambition to emerge as leading maritime power, deploying substantial naval forces. It seeks to control critical maritime routes and reinforce its territorial claims. And this strategy entails fortifying artificial islands, establishing military bases, underscoring its dedication to consolidating its presence and influence in the South China Sea. Concurrently, the region has also witnessed a significant increase in military presence, characterized by intensified activities and deployment from both regional and external powers. China's military expansion is counterbalanced by the US FONOPs designed to contest China's extensive claims. And this FONOPs is also conducted with regional allies and partners to uphold a free and open Indo-Pacific by implementing a rule-based international order. The dynamic of the South China Sea have become progressively integrated due to the involvement of non-state actors, such as maritime militia. These entities frequently employ gray zone strategies and tactics, complicating enforcement and jurisdictional matters. Moreover, environmental degradation is another critical concern, propelled by overfishing, damage to coral reef, and pollution exacerbated by military and economic undertakings. And the situation can become more problematic as it has garnered interest from external powers through joint patrols and military exercises. Their presence can incite a more assertive Chinese response, which may also prompt Russia and the other allies to counter the US-led containment strategy. In summary, I would like to propose 8 significant issues regarding the threats and challenges in the South China Sea. First is definitely the overlapping claims in the disputed waters will always become a fundamental issue that may likely trigger tension in the area. Second, strategic rivalry between major powers and their allies will also serve as principal driving factor that might escalate the dynamics in the disputed waters. FONOP's containment strategy, as well as the aggressive response and behavior from China, will also trigger more tension in the future. And it's not only deal with the claimant state, but also include the non-claimant states. And a major power country shows that it may employ its preferred method, which may contradict the established norms of international law. Third, escalating militarization by both leading powers in conjunction with Southeast Asian nations may also trigger and provoke prevailing tension in the disputed area. With the build-up of artificial island equipped with the military facilities demonstrated by China has been mimicked and replicated by some other Southeast Asian nations, as we have witnessed emulated by Vietnam. And fourth, competition for energy resources, particularly regarding the resource extraction, can potentially exacerbate tension among Southeast Asian nations and as well as the extra-regional actors. Fifth, environmental issues may also pose significant challenges that can disrupt the dynamics in South China Sea. Problems such as overfishing, pollution, habitat or coral reef degradation, and ecological damage may escalate tension in these disputed waters. Six, intensified utilization of gray zone strategy and tactics could worsen the situation in the disputed water in South China Sea. Emergence of non-state actors in conjunction with state actors has complicated the dynamics in these contested waters. Maritime militia, civilian fishing fleets with paramilitary training together with the Coast Guard are frequently employed to engage with state apparatus in the South China Sea. Seven, complex multi-domain operations between the major powers may also influence nations in the contested maritime regions. Both the major powers have established their respective cyberspace, aerospace forces, and even recently, one of the major powers has recently formed its information support force. And this is related with the influence operations that have been utilized to shape perception in the region among the Southeast Asian countries. And this can cultivate a sense of acquiescence toward their strategic objective. And the last one, 8, presence of extra-regional actors may incite more aggressive responses and increase involvement from external entities. Their presence is definitely significant. However, if it is not managed appropriately, it may introduce greater uncertainty in the disputed area. I think I stop here, and I thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor. We only have 35 minutes left for the Q&A, so I'll go directly to that. Since I cannot attempt to read all your names, I don't have bionic eyes yet. So please identify yourself before you ask the question, and also identify the panelists whom you want a reply from. I'll start from this side of the room to my left, meaning your right. And I'll go around the table, and then I'll go a second round again. I'll take 3 questions at a time. Okay, we'll start over there. Another one. Okay, here, and over there. 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name is Patrick. I'm from Switzerland. I have a question for Dr. Haido. You criticized the militarization of features in the South China Sea. But now we have a satellite picture showing that actually Vietnam is massively building up some of its features. And there's suspicion that a runway or some runways of up to 3 kilometers will be built. How does that go together, your criticism of militarization and what seems to be Vietnamese militarization of features? Thank you.
Next, I think it's General Bautista.
Good morning. I'm retired General Bautista from the Philippines. It is obvious that the Philippines and China have different positions in the West Philippine Sea or South China Sea. And the Philippines has chosen to resolve this issue through peaceful means and even submitted the case for arbitration. And the PCA of 2016 has given its ruling. Notwithstanding, China has demonstrated aggressive behavior towards the Philippines. And we all know what the ramming, water cannon, use of laser, even brandishing bladed weapons. And we have heard so many explanations, including China's rationalization of it. But please, help me understand what China hopes to achieve by such display of arrogance. Thank you.
Okay, third question. I think we had Mr. Yeah, right. Okay, over there.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to address my question to Professor J. Batombakal. There is a provisional arrangement between the Philippines and China on the rotation and resupply mission on the second Thomas Shoal, which is a submerged feature that is clearly inside the Philippines EEZ. So some in the Philippines view that provisional arrangement as a concession because the shoal is not within any overlapping zone. So UNCLOS, if I understand correctly, recommends provisional arrangements for countries with overlapping maritime zones only if the overlapping maritime zones are legitimate. So meaning my EEZ is overlapping with your EEZ, so let's have a provisional arrangement in the overlapping area as we continue to talk to find a final solution. So my question is there a legal basis under the Law of the Sea Convention for the Philippines to agree to such provisional arrangement? Thank you.
Okay, can we have the replies now? We'll start with Professor Hu.
You know, many friends, all foreign friends, ask me, "What's your plan in the South China Sea?" I always say we have no plan. So as to the situation between China and the Philippines nowadays, I think the situation is not China would like to say. If you look back a little earlier, in the early of 2023, Beijing has used all kinds of diplomatic means to persuade the Philippines not to change the status quo. But only around August, when I think the diplomatic means have exhausted, so China had begun to take actions to respond. You know, China wants to maintain the status quo, but if other party just challenge China's sovereignty and bottom line, I think Beijing has no choice but to respond, which means use all kinds of tools, including water cannon and other law enforcement activities. Thanks.
Thank you. Professor Batumbakal.
The provisional arrangements over Second Thomas Shoal are not characterized by either party as being subject or being based on UNCLOS Article 74. So clearly such arrangement is not a legally binding one, not really. It's not one that is mandated rather by law, but it is one that has been arrived by the parties on the basis of a political settlement. And the purpose of that arrangement clearly is that neither party wants the situation to escalate out of control, given that China exercised an illegal use of force against Philippine units in the Second Thomas Shoal and violated the sovereign immunity of Philippine vessels in Second Thomas Shoal. The next step, the escalation path to that, obviously is something that neither party wants. The fact that the arrangement details remain rather obscure, and all that the parties are willing to admit is that they agreed not to use force, I think is an indication that neither side is giving up any ground, especially legal grounds, in this situation.
Thank you. Is there anybody else in the panel who wants to give a reply? Yes, Professor.
So I want to respond to the question by Patrick from Switzerland, right? So you mentioned about the Vietnam build-up recently in the Spratly. Because I hope that Switzerland helps to see and understand that we feel threatened, right? Because before that, China's also make a large-scale land reclamation in the Spratly, and that artificial island has been militarized so quickly and massively with missile system, radar, and other logistical hub over there. So Vietnam, we also have our soldiers, our people in those islands nearby. Definitely, we believe that we have the superior sovereignty claim in the Spratly. And let me remind you also that Vietnam is the only country have been two-time attacked by China in the South China Sea, 1974, when China used force to expel the South Vietnamese out of Paracel. And 1988, Vietnam also suffered the attack from China in Spratly, and we lose the control of some groups. And we understand that it's a legitimate move to redress some imbalance upon the region. And I think that it's necessary for us to have some adequate facilities so that it could help to defend our position over there. Thank you.
Professor, who wants to give his reply to that question?
I just want a very short comment on that. China's threat cannot testify what the ambitions of Hanoi. Actually, it is Vietnam is the first claimant to do the land reclamation in the Spratly Islands, even in the early of 1970s. So that doesn't make sense. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Anybody, anything else from our panel? Okay, so we'll move to the next three questions. So we'll start at 1, 2, 3. I'm still in the middle table. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to have a suggestion to Professor Hubo.
Please introduce yourself.
Okay,
Identify yourself.
I'm the neighbor of Justice Antonio Carpio yesterday. My name is Vu Haidang. I'm from the Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam. Professor Hubo, so I understand that you consider the US as the troublemakers in the South China Sea. So I would like to suggest that maybe you should take the fight to those devil Americans instead of taking the fight to the Southeast Asians. So maybe you should claim sovereignty over Hawaii instead of Paracels. Maybe you should draw the dashed line in the Arctic instead of the South China Sea. Because you didn't do anything. Just take the fight to those devils, not to us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next question, number 2 and number 3.
Thank you very much. I think I want to make a quick comment on Professor Hu, and then I want to have a question to
Okay.
Mr. Powell.
Are you giving? You're not giving a question. You want to give a comment.
Well, a comment to.
Okay. I'm just taking questions right now. Is it okay?
Okay. That's
So,
fine. Well,
you don't have a question.
I have a question to
Okay.
to Powell. I mean, well, I agree with everything you said. I agree basically with everything you say. But my question is, what is the Americans' red lines, especially under Donald Trump in South China Sea? I mean, I agree with you. We have to defend. We have to help Philippines defend its possessions, its economic zone. It is no longer incidents. It is basically like occupation. But what is United States' red lines that it will help Philippines, especially under Donald Trump? Thank you.
Thank you. Third question.
Thank you, Chair. My question is addressed to Professor Hupo and my friend Hai. What would be the scenarios that will constitute a deal breaker when it comes to the two countries' consensus on properly managing the South China Sea dispute? So in other words, what are those scenarios that will lead to either party escalating actions against each other? So that is my first question to both of you. And my last question to Professor Frege. You mentioned about the role of extra-regional powers, and you are talking about the potential actions undertaken that could threaten South China Sea peace and stability. Could you care to elaborate what types of actions you have in mind that could potentially disturb the status quo? Thank you.
We'll start with Mr. Powell for the replies.
So the United States has made it clear that the West Philippine Sea falls under the auspices of the Mutual Defense Treaty, and that should the Philippines invoke the Mutual Defense Treaty, that the United States is prepared to come to the Philippines' defense. But that has to be something that the Philippines wants to happen, right? So the Philippines, we're not going to show up because we feel like it and sort of impose our will on the Philippines, because that's not what responsible nations and allies do. So our red lines are really the Philippines' red lines.
Okay, Professor Frege.
Okay, thank you for the question, Colin. What I mean by the role of extraterritorial powers is the deployment of more forces, because we are not talking about the Coast Guard, as shared by the yesterday panel, where there's an intention to involve the Navy, which can complicate. Because when we are talking about South China Sea regarding the rule of law, we want to employ the law enforcement agency with its Coast Guard, even though it's supported by the Navy. And having more external powers, especially if they bring their aircraft carriers and then big assets that can probably overmatch the capacity of the Chinese PLA, that may trigger a risk there. And especially with the situation, I don't know whether there will be assumption of the nuclear parity that would perhaps trigger a worse escalation. And regarding the multiple actions, not only the joint patrol, but large-scale exercises at the same time by both, the U.S. and the allies, as well as the Chinese, because it can invite, other actors, perhaps Russia or North Korea, as part of the engagement. And I don't think that this will help to achieve a peaceful resolution of the dynamics in the disputed waters. And in fact, it can worsen the scenario there. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Hu.
I just answered the question of Colin. That Dr. Colin, actually the relationship between Beijing and Hanoi is very, very good generally, and party to party, military to military, and I think in the last decade is a very good atmosphere. But the maritime disputes and the maritime conflict between China and the Philippines and the Vietnam are very, very serious. I think to some degree are much serious than China and the Philippines. And in the last 2 years, Beijing is very cautious and have goodwill on the Hanoi, and so as to the land recognition, Beijing protests bilaterally on the diplomatic channel, but Beijing has never publicly criticized Hanoi. So I think it's a goodwill. Another goodwill is that you should know that there are 3,000 of Vietnamese fishing vessels enter the territorial sea and enter the water of Hainan Island. But Beijing keeps quiet, and so I think that's also Beijing wants to keep the face of our brother. So, but it's a pity that the Hanoi, I think, has taken advantages of Beijing's goodwill. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Anyone from the panel who wants to add? Okay.
So I would like to raise some point in response to Dr. Hubo. Of course, I heard the allegation about 1,000 Vietnamese ships intruded into Hainan territorial waters. And I have some suspicions about that account because there are several reasons. The first one is the water around Hainan Island is not much fish over there. So they have no reason to go there to fish. And even if the fish over there, they will face a huge fleet of the Chinese fishing fleet, and they have no chance to survive. I think the second reason is that Hainan Island is strategically important to China, especially the submarine base over there. And I think that is not easily to get into that areas because that may be reason for surveillance for any type of reconnaissance that would not allow to approach it. And the third one, that we have the facility, we have the platform to check. And I did myself wrote 2 articles to diplomatic, the diplomatic to the 18 and 19, and we didn't see any evidence, reliable evidence for that presence. Of course, there may be some ship go there for trading for other reasons, but I don't think that it could go to 1,000 ships. And of course, to remind Professor Huibo that we have, of course, the IU fishing with the Vietnamese fishermen, but from the government point of view, the Vietnamese government don't support that. We have strictly rules against that, and we'll try to work on that. And then secondly, Professor Huibo also mentioned that Vietnam, the consolidations of opposition in Spratly for a while. Of course, that is mostly for the defensive, because we have position over there, we have been attacked by foreigners, so that's the reason why that we need to work on that to make sure that we have enough defense capability over there to work on any kind of scenario. And the third point, to make justice to China, I think that China's rising power behave quite more benign than many rising power in the past. Because I think that is important to note. And also that China, also Vietnam, also have the good history. Well, we settle the dispute in the Gulf of Tonkin very nicely, based on UNCLOS. After years, I think more than 25 years of negotiation, I think that is also the record, an example for us to follow. Of course, China can do
Dr.
much
Dan,
more better than that if we could apply the
Dr. Hai,
UNCLOS in the South China Sea. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hai. Professor who agreed not to comment on the comment of Dr. Hai, so I'll take the next 4 questions. It looks like I might have to do 3 rounds, so I'll take 4 questions this time. We'll start from the gentleman here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so that we'll finish with the middle table.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Peter Levy from the Australian Naval Institute. My question's for Professor Hu. Thank you for your comments and your remarks. It's always good to get a different perspective firsthand, so thank you. My question is similar to the one that I asked Captain Liu yesterday, and that is, can you elaborate on the basis for the 9-dash line concept? Captain Liu explained what it was, but I'm interested in understanding more the Chinese perspective on why you think that is a valid concept, particularly when it's at odds with the Law of the Sea Convention, which China has signed. Thank you.
Thank you. Second question.
Thank you, Ambassador Del Rosario. Thomas from ISIS Malaysia. 2 questions, one to Dr. Hu and second to Ray. Dr. Hu, I think you mentioned earlier that the US has just done sorted freedom of navigation operations against China in the South China Sea. Well, the Americans have also done FONOPS operations against Malaysia. Many of these are recorded, but you don't see Malaysians, whether it's government officials, Ministry of Defense, the general public, reacting in the same way when it comes to a report compared to, let's say, CCG's presence in Malaysia's EEZ. Why do you think that is? Ray, I appreciated your comments on the different perspectives of Southeast Asian states. I agree completely. Do you think that Southeast Asian claimant states can ever come to some kind of meaningful cohesion or agreement on the South China Sea, or has that salami already been sliced?
Okay, thank you. Question number 3.
Good morning. My question is addressed to all the panelists. In the context of the disputes, what does it mean to use force? Is it merely a threshold with anything less than lethal being acceptable? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Number 4, please. Please identify yourself.
Hi, this is James Kraska from the U.S. Naval War College, Stockton Center for International Law. So I have sort of a companion question to your question, and in particular to Hugh Bo, which is, what is the Chinese conception of a threat or use of force? Because the rest of the world looks to Article 2, Paragraph 4 of the Charter of the United Nations, and this has been interpreted as an imminent attack. And yet you sort of suggested, if I heard you correctly, that just the mere presence of U.S. or other countries' naval warships or aircraft beyond 12 nautical miles somehow constitutes a threat or a threat of force. That's not what the Secretary General of the United Nations determined in a 1985 study group published in which they concluded that the threat of the use of force was an imminent attack. This is also the same conclusion that, that Ambassador Tommy Koh of Singapore, the president of the 3rd UN Conference on the Law of the Sea, determined as well. And there's numerous other scholars and national statements on this regard, so I'd be very interested in China's position on this, to your understanding. Thank you.
Thank you. So I suppose, Professor Hu, they're all yours.
Okay. As to China's maritime claims in the South China Sea, I think very clearly, I think my understanding is that the Dash 9 just decide the scope of China's maritime claims. But the waters inside the Dash 9 totally, of course, are not territorial sea. I think there are 4 categories of interest. First, of the sovereignty of four separate groups. Second is the internal water and the territorial sea of the 4 shas. And the third, the EEZ and the continental shelf of the four shots. The failure is the historical rights. Beijing's position, you maybe think that there are arbitration ruling, but Beijing's policy and position on that is very clear. We will not accept, and we have followed to the arbitration ruling. So I couldn't represent Beijing, so I just tell you the Beijing's position on that. As to the military operation in the South China Sea, as James mentioned, I think for a long time, U.S. military always in the South China Sea and around. Not a news, but in the just at the beginning of the follow-ups of warship Larsen in the 2015, I think before you guys conduct follow-ups, we follow, no problem. And you transit Taiwan Strait, okay, we follow, no problem. But after that, every operation follows with the U.S. series of propagandas and the media's hyping. That makes I think I'm a professor major in sea power, and so I think the military activities, the politicalized of military activities in the South China Sea is a problem. Most of the military activities themselves may be okay, but military political sides of this kind of operations and also hyping this kind of operations is a problem. Thanks.
Okay. All the questions have been replied to. And anybody else from our panel who wants to say anything? Okay. Ray? Okay.
So yeah, several things. One, with regard to freedom of navigation operations, that is a program that has existed for over 4 decades. It has existed around the world, as has been indicated that by Mr. Daniel. The U.S. conducts it any time that there is an excessive claim. So, what is new is not the existence of the program, but the reaction by China. I urge everyone, if you are unfamiliar with the program, there is not a better guide in the world than the one put out by the Belfer Center at Harvard several years ago. You can Google it. Basically, it's freedom of navigations in the South, operations in the South China Sea, and I love it because it's got pictures. And as I said, I'm a simple guy, and it very, very clearly explains it. And in fact, after the 2018 incident in which a U.S. and Chinese ship almost collided during a freedom of navigation operation, I brought that to my counterpart in Canberra, my Chinese counterpart, as a defense attaché, and went through it with him. And I think he actually understood it quite well, and said, look, this is what we do, this is not new. Secondly, on the question of whether we can come to an agreement in the South China Sea, I'm a code of conduct pessimist. I don't think there will ever be a code of conduct in the South China Sea, because frankly, it's not in China's interest to have one. It's much easier for China simply to change the facts on the ground and eventually impose its will. So I think that will be an endless process. So I think that the best hope, lies in sort of bilateral or minilateral arrangements made amongst various states, like the U.S., like the Philippines and Vietnam have been working on recently. Finally, I just want to make a comment on the 9-dash line question, and I encourage everyone to go out and listen to some of the news footage released by Indonesia recently during the harassment of their survey activity in the North Natuna Sea, and listen to what the China Coast Guard says. They announce very clearly that China has indisputable sovereignty over the Spratly Islands and adjacent waters, which apparently includes the North Natuna Sea. So indisputable sovereignty. So anytime you hear this line from China that, well, we don't claim sovereignty over the entire 9-dash line, we only claim it over, say, the Nansha Islands and adjacent waters. Well, adjacent is interpreted very broadly depending on their need to do so. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll have Dr. Jay first, and then Dr. Hai.
Yes, actually, To add on to the comment on the 9-dash line, the nature of the 9-dash line, thank you, Dr. Bo, for your explanation. The problem here is that there are always different explanations for the 9-dash line. As of 1995, for example, Dr. Ji Gugao, who became China's representative and member of ITLOS, wrote an article offering 3 different interpretations of the 9-dash line, no? 3 different ways. And it seems that despite that, no, China has not settled on an actual explanation. And yet, no, China insists on asserting indisputable sovereignty on waters well beyond any potential median line between any of these 4 shas. Best example, 2022, 60 nautical miles off of Pangasinan, which is just off Luzon, the China Coast Guard intervened and interfered with a marine scientific research expedition of the Philippines and Taiwan, asserting sovereignty over that area of the open sea, far away from any other potential Chinese island, and much closer, 50 to 60 nautical miles off what is indisputably Philippine territory, Luzon itself. So that, I think we have a real problem there. If up to now, China is unable to settle on a clear explanation of its claims, and therefore that is what essentially gives rise to all these disputes and misunderstandings. Thank you.
Okay, we'll just have Professor Haido first, and then we'll go back to Professor Ho. Just for everybody's information, I sought permission from Dr. Baker. We will do away with the break. So if you need to go out, have coffee, or go to the restroom, please do it on your own. But we'll continue until the panel for the ambassadors. It looks like so many nameplates are erupting as the discussion goes on. Okay, Dr. Haido, and then we'll go back to Professor Ho.
So I would like to touch upon the issue of gray zones. I think that we need to frame the question right. The first issue is not, the problem is not we have a dispute. The problem is how we handle the disputes. And the second one is the gray zone. The gray zone is the threat not only to the rules of law, but to the security in the region. So threat is basically composed of only that abstract concept, only 2 components. The first one, the rise of the offensive capability. The second is the intent to use that. So in the South China Sea, we're worried, there's increased, the offensive capability. The second, the gray zone is not only the activity under threshold, the use of force, but indicate the intention not to use the peaceful means for that. So that all combined make other people worried. Thank you.
I want to respond to the Bar's comment on that. As to the China's maritime claims, you should trust credible source, because in China, many Chinese have very different things. Like the 40 categories of claims, you can also read it in the website of China's Foreign Ministry website. So, and you can also trust me. I'm an expert on that. You mentioned adjacent water. Usually, I think means that 12 nautical miles of the features, and that's all. And I also want to add one sentence on the follow-ups. Follow-ups is only the practice and concept of the U.S. Other countries, including China, Australia, UK, Japan, other countries other powers don't have this kind of practice and concept. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Next batch of questions. I think better take 5 this time and finish everybody on this side. Okay, we'll start with the first one over there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'll finish this side all in one go. Okay.
Thank you, Madam President. I have a question to Mr. Powell. By the way, my name is Mateusz Hatys, and I am a research fellow at the Center for Asian Affairs. And my question is, do you think that China's gray zone operations reach their limits of effectiveness, and nowadays they are pretty much counterproductive, given the consistent implementation of transparency initiative by Philippines, but also examples of transparent behavior by other countries like Vietnam and Indonesia? And if so, what do you think will be the changes in China's tactics when it comes to the South China Sea dispute? Thank you very much.
Okay, next question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Asuko Kanehara, past president of the Japanese Society of International Law. My question is addressed to Ray, and also my question is related to the previous ones. And I think violent incident in the South China Sea could fall under the use of force and armed attack according to international law. In that case, they will form an issue of international peace and security beyond bilateral and regional issues. Then, the measures could be taken as self-defense, collective self-defense, even coercive measures based upon resolutions of United Nations Security Council. If I could hear your thought on this point, I would be grateful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Number 3. The gentleman.
Thank you very much. Professor Hu, I think you mentioned very interesting about consistency of China in its position in the South China Sea, which I agree somehow. Interestingly, you mentioned that China has done that even before UNCLOS, right? Very interesting. Also, I learned from the Philippines also did the same. Actually, Philippines has the Treaty of Paris, the box like ocean space, which then somehow adjusted after the ratification of UNCLOS by the Philippines. Do you think that China might want also to do that also in this case? Thank you so much.
Okay, next question.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Vân from the South China Sea Chronicle Initiative based in Vietnam. And firstly, I'd like to add some information on Dr. Hai's comments. So we have a timeline on the use and on the threat and the use of force since 1970s until 2015, and the data shows that Vietnam is the country that suffers the most under the threat and the use of force in the South China Sea. Come back to my questions. I'd like to have 2 questions to Professor Huber. And so from your talk, it looked like the US is the biggest threat in the South China Sea. However, from the talk by the Coast Guard commanders, ambassadors, and scholars from the Philippines, Indonesia, Japan, and your friendly neighbor Vietnam, we can see that their most concern is the threat to the rule of law by China behaviors. And they confirm that the UNCLOS is the legal basic to solve the maritime disputes in the South China Sea. So it seems that China, and on the other hand, many countries welcome the presence of the US in the region. So it seems that China is alone in its interpretation on the threat to the South China Sea.
Yeah, please give your question.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Can you explain on that? I mean, on the China unique position in the interpretation of the threat to the South China Sea. And my second question is that cooperation is a way to reduce tension in the South China Sea, and China also acknowledges that. So, in the past, the Philippines, Vietnam proposed several cooperation proposals to China. For example, the mandatory fishing ban to preserve the fish stock in the South China Sea. And yesterday, a proposal of fishing cooperation in international water among the Southeast Asian countries and external actors. What is your opinion on that? And do you think that China should consider those proposals? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. The last question over here.
Thank you so much. I'm Dana from Cambodia. So I have a question addressed to Dr. Do. You mentioned about the attack, China attack on 1974 and 1988. This is definitely a threat to the international law. So in case of a similar scenario in the future, what can we do about that? And by the way, I refer to the government, in the claimant state, and also international community? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I just want to let everybody know I'll go for a second round. I'll start with Mr. Dharma one here, and then I'll go back to that side of the room. So can we have the replies, please? I think we'll start with Professor Hu.
There are so many questions. I just picked some of them. Okay. As to the, I think every party, every claim has its own claims. I think China's claims are very consistent, and Philippines and Vietnamese. So it's difficult to persuade other side to get a, to quit it up. So as far as I know, Beijing's policy and claim towards the South China Sea will not be changed in the foreseeable future. So, but as China's perspective, the Philippines' policy claims are not consistent enough. So, the second question about I don't say that the U.S. is the troublemaker in the South China Sea. I just share the China's perspective. So, and also I can share with the fishing. Go back to the fishing vessels of Vietnamese. It's not a news that Vietnamese fishing vessels go everywhere in the South China Sea, in the undisputed waters of Malaysia, Indonesia, and China. So I have a data if you like. I can share with you. As to cooperation, China is very open to the South China Sea cooperation. So very, very open as far as I know. Thanks.
Okay, Doctor, I will not comment on the comments. So anyway, I suppose that's your answer to all the questions, right? Okay, it's enough. All right. So anybody who wants to say something?
Yeah. So yes, there were a couple of questions directed at me. One is are China's gray zone activities now counterproductive? Have they sort of reached their apex? I think we've long passed that, right? So I have long said that the effects of the Philippines Transparency Initiative have been three. One, the building of national resilience. I think that is unquestionably the case. They are increasing their defense and security budgets. They've redone their national security strategy. They've increased their budgets around the Coast Guard. Second, international support. Unquestionably, you've seen large increases in U.S. funding. You've seen France and Japan recently come to help the Philippines rebuild its Coast Guard. We've got these these joint patrols, maritime cooperative activities, the U.S., Japan, Philippine trilateral. All of these things happen in light of the Transparency Initiative. And finally, reputational costs, which is really what we're talking about. They've imposed tremendous reputational costs on China, which is why you see this flood of propaganda coming out of various outlets, including some of it directed at me. So, I think that China is clearly feeling the effects. It is extremely counterproductive, and what they have essentially done is decided that it's more important to try to put the Philippines in its place than it is to stop the bleeding on the reputational cost side. And that is essentially these are the actions of an occupation force, right? Imposed peace and stability under the occupier's regime is the goal. And so that is the priority that they've placed. And then finally, on the question of the use of force or an armed attack, that is a term of art that is undefined. If the Philippines at any point had wanted to declare that the use of water cannons, the ramming of their ships, the brandishing of bladed weapons, all of these things were an armed attack, they would have been perfectly justified in going to the United States and saying, we have been attacked.
All right. Okay, we just have one last comment from Dr. J, and then we'll wrap up that question series, right? Okay, J, then I'll go to the as well. Oh, okay.
I just wanted to note that the questions on use of force are pretty stark and were not yet answered, particularly the Chinese views on the use of force. And this is a major concern because, as we've seen, the use of bladed weapons, etc., ramming, etc., these do not seem to be a problem for China. As long as firearms are not used or kinetic weapons are not used, everything below that is allowable. And that's a problem because that is coercion. And coercion is just as illegal in international law as the use of force. As to the limits of the gray zone activities, I think as far as the Philippines is concerned, the Philippines no longer considers these as gray zone activities. They're now classified as illegal, coercive, aggressive, and deceptive activities.
Okay.
So there's no gray anymore. In that sense, it's no longer effective as gray zones. And the changes to tactics is very clear for us. The trajectory is very clear. The next step is the actual employment of force against our people, as exemplified by the June 17 incident.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Dr. Hai, the last word. Please be brief because I want to go for the last set of questions.
Thank you for that. I think for the questions of Vietnamese fishermen, I think that there's some point should be noted. The first one, Vietnam is a law-abiding nation. And we admitted there's IU fishing by Vietnamese fishermen, but it's a small number of Vietnamese fishermen. And, but we also think that the problem is much big and complex than that, because the Vietnamese fishermen were driven away from their own water, from their fishing stock. So there's a livelihood problem, so we need some time to resolve it. And because we admitted and we work on it, the second, and it should not be an excuse for the violation of international law and gray zone operations of the third party. And we did have some Vietnamese fishermen continue to fish in the paracels, but it's not the IUU, that is our waters, that is features we claim and will be expelled by Chinese in 1974. So Vietnamese fishermen continue to fish over there. And I think that the legitimate rights of Vietnamese fishermen in that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry I have to withdraw what I said. We only have 4 minutes left for the next panel. I cannot take the next round anymore. So thank you very, very much. We have to move to give way to the panel of ambassadors. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your participation.
Thank you very much, ma'am. So that goes for our panel 4. Before we conclude to the panels, may I request you to please rise together with the panel chair for a quick photo, and then we'll continue with the next part of our program. Thank you very much. So while our panel and panel chair are taking their photos, the rest can still continue with getting their snacks or coffee, but we will strictly still continue and start the next panel at exactly 10:45. Thank you very much. So for our panel and panel chair, please smile for the camera. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much.